If you are wanting to relocate to Latin America, whether it be for full-time, part-time, or even not relocate at all and really just have diversification options, there are quite a few differences that you can expect when you are relocating, often from a Western country to somewhere in Latin America. So today I'm in Paraguay and I'm going to dive into some of the things that you can expect when you're relocating to LatAm. So the first is timing. Latin America really runs on their own time, and a lot of the people here, and culturally it is very normal to not always be on time, to be 5, 10, even 25 minutes late. Even if you have a set time, it is very common that the locals here in Latin America are going to be late at some point, if not more often than not of the time. So that is something to expect. It is a very relaxed culture, especially when it comes to a working environment, and it's very different from the West. So you just have to know this, have an open mind, and adapt as you come in. So the next point is what I like to call due diligence. Now, this is more of a lifestyle due diligence than it is when it comes to the bureaucracy aspect of Latin America. However, I will give you an example to illustrate exactly what I mean by due diligence. So recently I had to purchase a fridge, and we went in, we found a fridge. Of course, we had to double and triple check that it was the right voltage. And I now almost never take a salesperson's word. I like to see on the documentation, on the product itself, that that is the correct voltage or the correct specification that you are really needing. We went in, purchased the fridge, and on the receipt, it was in another currency. Now, I needed it to be in the local currency, but they said it was not possible. So we left the store, and then I realized not only was the currency not the amount that I needed, but the actual amount on the factura here in Paraguay was incorrect. So we went back, we asked, where is this number coming from? It's lower than what I actually paid for the fridge. And it turned out that they had given us a factura for the wrong product, for somebody else's product that was a lower denomination amount than the fridge that I had purchased. So then they were able to correct the amount on the factura, but then they also corrected the currency on the factura. So I am very cautious, and I always warn clients to do your own due diligence, whether it's something big or it's as simple as purchasing an item in a local store. You really need to make sure that amounts are correct, they're charging you proper amounts, facturas are correct, and it's not uncommon to ask 2, 3, even 4 times. And if you ask somebody different, the answer may very well change. So next up, I'm going to talk about a positive and a negative of Latin America. Now, there are certain jurisdictions, and more in Latin America than in any other continent in the globe, that are very friendly for taxes. So some of the most interesting countries that a lot of people do like to move to full time are territorial tax systems here in Latin America, and they can really benefit you to get low or no taxation depending on the source of income. So taxation is definitely a plus, but a minus, and this is very subjective, but a minus is very much so the weather and the humidity. In the winter months, if we are below the equator, winter is going to be June, July, August. In some parts of Latin America, it can be quite nice. You'll need a jacket, maybe a light coat. Great weather, but in summertime, and if not year round, depending on where you are in Latin America, it is very extremely humid. Now, if you're coming from somewhere in the US where there is very high humidity, this may not be a shock to you, but if you're coming from elsewhere in the US, Canada, certain parts in Europe, especially in Northern Europe, you may be quite shocked by the constant level of humidity, and it persists a lot of the time for months and months on end in the summer. It does not stop. We're talking about Panama, Paraguay, certain places in Colombia as well. Of course, there's higher elevation, but certain areas in Colombia, parts of Uruguay, Brazil, it gets very humid. And so while it can be good for your body, your skin, you really have to make sure that that is a climate that you're going to be able to acclimatize to in time. Next up, we have holidays. Now, holidays in Latin America, they do holidays like no one else. The amount of long weekends, of holidays off, you really need to know what that country's national holiday schedule looks like, or just again do your due diligence, double, triple check if you have an appointment, if you're going to book an appointment. You need to do something, especially with the government. You're going to want to make sure that offices are open, people are working. There are many holidays, long weekends, and that also goes with the slower pace of lifestyle as well. So you do need to expect that when coming to Latin America. So I get a lot of questions about language barrier. Now, of course, there's a very obvious language barrier. Most of the countries down here in Latin America speak Spanish predominantly. However, one thing that I really did not foresee, and a lot of clients that we see don't foresee when coming to Latin America, is that English is very much so not widely spoken. And I personally believe that English is spoken less here in Latin America than almost any other continent in the world, because in Europe, in Asia, there is no one predominant language. And so English becomes the more predominant second language for locals and for tourists alike. So an example, in France, they speak French. But in the rest of Europe, most of the countries don't speak French and have their own respective languages. So the second common language becomes English. However, that's really not the case here in Latin America. Again, it depends where you are, but for the most part in Latin America, they speak Spanish, and a lot of the tourism is also from Spanish speakers, whether it be from Spain or more predominantly from other countries in Latin America. So English is very uncommon, I find, in the younger generation. It is a little bit more common. However, I do find it to be more of a struggle if you don't speak Spanish than if you were in a country in Europe or even a country in Asia, where the local vendors on the street are likely to know some English, at least some numbers in English. I find that much more difficult to navigate here in Latin America. So you really do want to make sure that you understand at least the basics of Spanish. It will go far enough to a degree. And also, if you speak Portuguese, of course, in Brazil, or even in certain parts of Paraguay, like Ciudad del Este, then they are going to speak Portuguese predominantly as a second language, and even more Arabic and Chinese you'll hear than English. So next up, we have daylight savings time. Now, this can be an interesting pro and con, but most countries in Latin America do not go by daylight savings time. And so part of the time you're in EST time, depending where you are, you may be on mountain time, central time. And so I find this very interesting. Can be beneficial for work, or potentially it could not be beneficial for work depending on what you do. But it is interesting going in between the time zones. You think you're in EST New York time, but then daylight savings happens in the US, doesn't happen here, and now you're on a different time zone. So this is something important to keep in mind as well. So next up, we have traffic. Now, traffic in most of Latin America, of course, is at its peak. And I have been stuck in traffic for over an hour in certain parts of Latin America, but this is not uncommon, unfortunately, and it's really in those rush hour times. So AM, PM, peak rush hour, there is quite a bit of traffic. And while some cities do have a metro, most cities in Latin America either don't have a metro, even a lot of the capitals don't have a metro, or they don't have a very well established metro system. So this can be tricky, and typically my workaround after living here for almost 3 years, I will just not, if at all possible, take an Uber, take a Bolt. I will try to not do that during peak rush hour times, because it will take you 3-4 times as long than if you were to do that at any other point of the day. So last but not least is natural disasters. Now, we have definitely seen our fair share of natural disasters. Depending on where you're from, in which part of the world, you may be very used to this. However, in many countries in Latin America, there is some sort of natural disaster that you can somewhat expect. So in Chile, we were definitely caught in quite a few earthquakes. It depends where you are along the coast, but definitely quite a few somewhat major earthquakes. Same in Colombia. In Mexico, we've been in lines for hurricanes. So there really is flooding and natural disasters in general that you have to be aware of depending on the city, the country that you're in. And this may be different from where you are originally from, and maybe something additional for you to keep in mind. So if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. While there are positives and negatives to living anywhere in the world, I've absolutely enjoyed living in Latin America for the last 3 years and continuing to do so while traveling and spending quite a bit of time in the countries here. If you're interested in learning more about your global citizen diversification options, hit the video on the screen now or book a call with us below. If you're ready to relocate to Latin America, to optimize your tax, to bring your investments into certain countries, and to then obtain a 0% tax status. I'll see you in the next video, and until next time.